Have you ever held a ticket in your hand, real, paid for, stamped and verified, only to be stopped at the door because someone looked you up and down and said, "You don't look like you belong in there"? That's exactly what happened. One night, right outside a concert hall glowing with chandeliers and velvet, a young woman was blocked from entering, not because her ticket was fake, but because her appearance didn't match the expensive seats inside. And as the crowd around her whispered and sneered, something unforgettable happened. Her father, a world-renowned cellist and the evening's guest performer, stepped out and stood by her side. In that single moment, the whole city seemed to hold its breath. One ticket, one insult, and one brutal truth about how society treats the people it chooses to look down on. The city at night felt like a giant stage. Skyscrapers shimmered against the sky, their glass walls throwing back neon light in every direction. Down below, the streets hummed with car horns, heels striking pavement, and laughter spilling out of rooftop bars, an orchestra of noise and shine. But walk just a few blocks away, and everything changed. The neon faded into the sickly flicker of old street lamps, buzzing as if they were on their last breath. People hunched under ragged blankets along the curbs. The smell of trash mixed with exhaust clung to the air. A boy no older than 8 bent to pick up a broken piece of bread someone had dropped. The man who had dropped it scowled, hurried his steps, as if the sight itself offended him. The city was split in two. One world bathed in light, another drowned in shadow. And tonight, the two would collide at one place, the Grand Concert Hall. The hall stood like a marble palace in the square, its wide steps glowing under floodlights. Crystal chandeliers blazed behind tall glass doors, scattering light and diamonds across the crowd pressing forward. Women in gowns swept past on the arms of men in tuxedos. Laughter and perfume filled the air. Limousines pulled up one after another, and tickets flashed at scanners with a neat, affirming beep, as if each sound confirmed a person's worth. But in the corners, shadows lingered. A homeless man leaned against one of the columns, a cardboard sign on his lap. "I'm hungry. Please. Help." No one slowed down to read. An old veteran limped past, his cane tapping against the stone, the hollow thud of his prosthetic leg echoing behind him. His face was lined, his eyes still sharp, but the group of young men smoking nearby only saw a waist. They snickered, loud enough for him to hear. Beside him, a retired police dog panted heavily, its fur graying, its canine collar worn and dirty. Once it had been a hero, lunging into danger for men who had praised it. Now it was nothing but a burden, shoved aside like trash. Across the street, a little boy with brown skin clutched a plastic bag with crumbs of broken cookies. He stood silently, staring at the rich children ushered inside by their parents. His wide eyes held more than curiosity. They held a quiet ache, a question too old for a child. Why does the world divide like this? They were there, the forgotten ones, pressed to the edges of the light. Witnesses, invisible to the glittering crowd. From a late bus, a young woman stepped down. Her coat was plain, her shoes worn thin. But in her hand, she gripped a ticket that gleamed under the streetlight. A VIP pass. She held it tight as if it were treasure. Not because of the price, but because it was her link to the man waiting inside the father who would play cello on that very stage. She had saved for months from her bookstore job to buy it. Tonight she wanted to sit close, to hear every note, to let him see her there in the crowd, his daughter, his pride. She drew a deep breath and started up the glowing steps. But at the door, a heavy hand blocked her way. "Where are you going?" the guard asked flatly. She raised the ticket. "VIP section, row D, seat 12. He glanced at the paper, then looked her over. The old coat, the tired shoes, the simple hair. A smirk tugged at his mouth. "VIP, huh? Doesn't look like you could afford it." The words cut like glass. Around her, people slowed. A woman in sequins whispered to her husband, Probably picked it up off the street. The guard folded his arms, already dismissing her. The ticket didn't matter. To him, her appearance said everything. Her throat closed. She wanted to speak, to shout that it was real, that she had earned her place. But her lips trembled soundlessly. The crowd rustled with low laughter and sideways glances. No one stepped in. To them, it was a brief distraction before the show. The guard's stare pinned her in place. The lobby gleamed just beyond the glass. A lake of light and crystal, and in it the reflections of people who didn't have to explain themselves. Someone behind her sighed loudly, the sound of impatience sharpened to a blade. "Just scan it," a small voice said. It came from the curb, where a boy with a plastic bag of crumbs stood in the wash of headlights. He didn't move closer. He only lifted his chin, like he'd seen this scene before and knew how it was supposed to go. The guard didn't bother looking at him. "Back up, kid," he said, still staring at the girl. "Rules are rules." "What rule?" the veteran asked. He had shuffled near without anyone noticing, cane in one hand, the other resting on the graying neck of the dog beside him. His voice was mild, old wood and gravel, but steady. "There are rules against scanning tickets." The guard's jaw twitched. He pressed his lips into a smile that wasn't one. "I can tell the fake ones. Saves time." The veteran nodded as if he'd learned something new. "And I can tell trouble before it starts," he said. "That saved lives." A woman in a sparkly dress gave a tiny laugh in the way people laugh when they're certain they're on. "The side that wins." "This is getting ridiculous," she whispered to the man with her. "We're going to miss the overture." The dog, overheated and patient, leaned into the veteran's leg. The boy's eyes darted between the ticket, the guard, and the dog's slow panting. The girl's fingers whitened around the stub of paper. She had the look of someone trying not to tremble, which always makes the trembling worse. "Please," she said, quietly now, to the scanner on the guard's hip more than to the man himself. "It's real. He didn't touch it." "If I scan it," he said, voice pitched for the audience gathering, "and it comes up stolen, I call the police. That what you want?" The word police did something to the veteran's shoulders, a small stiffening, like a memory tightening a knot. The dog's ears pricked. The boy took half a step back. "Scan it," the veteran said, softer. "End it clean." A door thumped open down the line, and a valet jogged out, waving at a driver to pull ahead. A long black car glided to the curb, oily smooth, and stopped with a hush of tires. The air shifted the way air does when money arrives and expects the air to notice. The rear door opened and a man unfolded from the interior, crisp and wrinkleless, every line of him tailored. He didn't seem to walk so much as approach. Men like that do not walk. "They arrive. Evening, Mr. Vale," the guard said. Relief sliding into his posture. The man Vale took in the cluster at the door with a practiced eye. His gaze brushed the girl and moved on, like she was a smudge on glass. He didn't need to know the facts to feel correct about them. "Everything all right?" he asked, as if the answer could only be yes. "Trying to slip in on a VIP," the guard said. "Of course," Vale said. He turned to the girl, tilting his head a fraction, the way one might incline toward a confusing painting. "It's important," he said in a voice the crowd could hear, "to protect the experience for our patrons." He smiled. Nothing reached his eyes. "You understand." She understood plenty. She understood how quickly a group can become a crowd and a crowd can become a wall. She understood that somewhere inside, a man she loved was tightening a bow, settling his instrument into the cradle of his chest, his fingers testing the string's give. She could almost hear it, the low, golden breath of it. She understood that if she cried here, they would say she was hysterical on top of everything else. "Protect the experience," the veteran repeated, not unkindly, as if tasting the phrase. His thumb stroked the dog's ear. "I fought for your experience," he said, but not to Vale. He said it to the night. Listen, the guard snapped, finished with grace. You're blocking the entrance. I can move, the girl said quickly, stepping aside without lowering the ticket. A pair in matching tuxedos skimmed past, eyes sliding over her like she was a signpost. Something hot and shameful rose in her chest, not because she believed them, but because she didn't, and that made her furious. Just scan it, the boy whispered again. He edged closer until the neon caught in his eyes. There was a smudge of chocolate on his cheek. He looked at the guard the way a child looks at a locked door, half fear, half faith that doors are for opening. Hey, Vale said to the boy, still smooth, still smiling. This isn't a place for strays. The boy flinched, and the veteran's head came up sharp. The dog, who had been lying down, let out one hoarse bark, not loud, but sudden. Heads turned. Rex, the veteran murmured. The name eased out of him like something remembered by muscle and bone. The dog's eyes fixed on the guard's belt, not the baton. The scanner. Sir, the guard said to Vale, I'll handle it. Oh, I know you will, Vale said, the way a man says he trusts the horse not to break its leg. Do be quick. The glass doors sighed open and spilled a wash of cooler air over the steps. A group swept inside. Music floated from somewhere deeper in the building. Not the orchestra yet, but the sound of instruments tuning, violins testing their light. Nervous voices, a cough shaped by velvet. It was like standing on the other side of a curtain, hearing the play but not part of it. Let me see the ticket, the guard said finally. With the magnanimity of a king granting a favor, the girl didn't hand it to him. She held it under the scanner and took one breath. Then another. The guard, annoyed, jerked the device free and aimed it. A red line crawled over the paper. Beep. A clean, certain beep. The same beep she had heard echo again and again as other people walked through without breaking stride. For a heartbeat, no one moved. The crowd's attention snagged between the sound and its own expectations. The dog's tongue sagged happily. The boy's mouth opened in a smile he didn't trust yet. Must be a glitch, the guard said quickly. He tried again. Beep. The little green check bloomed on the screen like a leaf. She's good, the veteran said, not triumphantly, just stating the thing that was. Vale's smile didn't change, but a tiny muscle ticked at his jaw. Technology can be tricked, he observed to nobody in particular. Not this thing, one of the ushers muttered before he could stop himself. He turned pink when the guard glared. I mean, it's pretty reliable. There you go, the veteran said to the girl. Seems the door knows the truth. The guard shifted, working his radio for a new authority. Supervisor to North Entrance, he said. Possible counterfeit. Counterfeit, the veteran repeated, tasting that too. I'm not a counterfeit, the girl said. It came out small, but it was the truest sentence she had ever spoken. I bought it. I can show you the receipt. No need, Vale said, voice silken. No one is accusing you personally. He put the lightest emphasis on the last word, the way one places a fingertip on a bruise. However, we have standards to maintain. If we let anyone with a questionable story. What's questionable? The boy asked, stepping forward. She has a ticket. Where are your parents? Vale snapped, the smile gone. Inside, the boy said, and it was probably a lie, but it was the kind a city teaches a child to tell. Security, Vale said softly. Don't, the veteran told him. Not for a child asking a fair question. The guard's radio crackled. On my way, a voice answered. A breeze kicked up the smell of rain, the metallic hint of a storm sweeping in late. The girl found herself thinking of the first lesson. Her father had taught her about listening to music. You don't fight the silence. You listen to it too. The silence between the notes is part of the song. In the silence that followed, every small sound made itself known. The soft whine of the patoo dog, the boy's breath, the crystalline click of a woman adjusting her bracelet, the tiny electronic sigh of the scanner. Somewhere inside, a cellist drew a bow across a string and a tone unfurled, a warm, honeyed thread that ran straight through her. It was so faint she could have imagined it, but she didn't think she had. A mop bucket rattled near the staff. Entrance. The janitor pushing it paused, taking in the tableau with eyes that had seen most things and were still shocked by some. She leaned her weight on the handle, studying the girl's face the way a mother studies a bruise on a child and knows exactly how it happened. Then she looked toward the stage door, where a narrow hallway led past rehearsal rooms to the wings. "Hey," she called softly to the usher who'd blurted about the scanner. "Get Martina." "Who?" "Stage manager. Tell her there's a situation at North, and to bring her list." The janitor's eyes flicked to the girl's face again. The usher hesitated, uncertain if this fell under his job or under heroics. Then he slid away, swallowed by the stream of people. "Step aside," the guard told the girl, because orders felt safer than facts. "You're obstructing." "She's not," the veteran said. "She is," Vale said. "We all are." The janitor murmured, but no one heard her. The supervisor arrived with a briskness that suggested practice. He had the face of a man whose best decisions are made when no one is around to see them. He looked from the ticket to the girl to the guard's expression, and then, briefly, to Vale. A certain kind of calculus clicked behind his eyes. "Scan," he said. The guard did. Reluctantly. "Beep." The supervisor took the scanner and did it himself. "Beep." He peered at the display. "Issued through the official portal. Purchased 3 months ago. Seat D12, row D." He looked up. "It's valid." "It's a mistake," Vale said, patient as a surgeon. "These systems, Mr. Vale," the supervisor said, respectful, but firm. "The ticket is valid." A flicker ran through the crowd, the peculiar surprise of witnessing a rule applied in defiance of expectation. The boy smiled for real this time. The dog thumped his tail once against the stone, then let her in. The veteran said, voice gentling with relief. The guard didn't move. He was trapped in the narrow space between his certainty and the small green check on a screen. He wanted someone to tell him what to feel. Vale started to say something else, but the janitor made a small sound, half cough, half warning, and everyone turned. A man stood in the open staff doorway, framed by yellow light and the ghost of rain. He held a cello case by its handle, the old leather scuffed where countless stages had scuffed it before. He wasn't tall, exactly, but he held the space around him the way a musician holds breath. His hair had gone gray in the uneven, honest way of a man who had earned every strand. He scanned the faces in the knot of people until his gaze reached the girl. Whatever he had been about to say to the stage manager beside him never got said. The quiet that fell was not the silence of confusion or stunned politeness. It was the quiet that happens when a note lands exactly where it should. The girl's mouth opened on his name, but air was all that came. He had a bow in his other hand, as if he'd walked out carrying the exact tools he needed to cut through the moment. He came down the steps, not quickly but without pause, and set the case on the stone as if the stone could be trusted to hold it. Up close, the lines at the corners of his eyes were clearly made by smiling. "What's wrong?" he asked, a question that wasn't about tickets or doors. It was the question fathers ask when the world turns stupid in front of their children. "She can't go in," the guard blurted. She can," the supervisor said, almost over him. "Her ticket's valid." Vale's smile returned, lacquered and thin. "There's been confusion," he said smoothly. "A misunderstanding. We were simply protecting the experience," the veteran murmured. The father's eyes flicked fast toward the voice, and in them was a flash of recognition, the sideways nod men give each other who know what it costs to keep certain promises. The dog sniffed the cello case, as if cataloging its history. The father turned to the girl. In the rise and fall of his breath, she could read everything he wanted to say. You're here. I knew you would be. I told you you weren't too late. I told you that note you heard when you were little, that made you cry without knowing why, that was real, and it's waiting for you. He didn't touch her, not yet. He lifted the ticket from her hand with the care one uses on fragile things, and held it toward the scanner. Beep. The green check flared, almost celebratory. He looked at the guard as a teacher looks at a student who has not done the reading, but might yet. Thank you, he said, and somehow the words weren't salt. They were a rope thrown into a current. The supervisor stepped aside. Welcome, he said, and meant it. The girl breathed. The breath went all the way in. She reached for the case. Handle, and the father let her take a piece of the weight. The way he had once let her carry the bow when she was small, and couldn't believe the hair was real horsehair. His hand brushed her knuckles, nothing grand, but enough to anchor her to the moment and to him. Sir, Vale said, smooth even in retreat, we try to ensure. I know what you try, the father said, not unkindly. I try too. He looked past Vale to the veteran and the dog and the boy with the plastic bag. He looked at the homeless man resting in the shadow of the column, whose eyes were closed like a man pretending to sleep in a room where he is not allowed to rest. The father nodded once at each of them, a greeting, a receipt, a thank you. If the crowd noticed, it didn't say, come on, he told his daughter. They're waiting for us. Us? She said, dizzy with the word. You and me, he said. Always. They moved toward the doors. The veteran tapped his cane twice in a little salute. The dog huffed, pleased. The boy lifted his palm in a shy wave. The janitor pushed her bucket along, and the wheels didn't rattle so much anymore. As the girl crossed the threshold, the sound inside swelled, musicians settling, the prelude's faint skeleton finding flesh. She looked back once. The night had deepened, and a wind had picked up, cleaning the edge off the heat. Vale stood on the step where sunlight could not reach him, smoothing his tie with 2 fingers, preparing to be the sort of man who never believes he has been moved. The guard looked down at his scanner and for the first time seemed to read it. Inside, the chandelier's light felt softer, as if softened by the people it now fell upon. A hush gathered. Somewhere close, the stage manager called 5 minutes. The father squeezed her shoulder and set his case down, and as he did, he leaned to her ear and said the simplest thing, the truest thing, the only thing that mattered in that second. You're here. Outside, rain began, pinprick and promising. The first drops struck the steps and spread like coins. The veteran tilted his face up, let the water find him. The dog raised its nose to the smell and closed its eyes. A door clicked shut behind the girl, and the world divided once more. Music on one side, weather on the other. But not the same division as before. Not the same at all. The hush inside the hall felt different from the silence outside. Here, it wasn't the silence of dismissal or judgment. It was anticipation. That rare, trembling pause before the first note of music makes strangers into an audience. She walked beside her father down the aisle, her heart thudding louder than the scattered coughs and whispers that filled the room. People turned their heads. Some recognized the cellist at once. Others looked at her, not knowing who she was, only knowing she did not match the dresses and tuxedos they had admired all evening. A few frowned, measuring her coat against their gowns. But she kept walking, the warmth of her father's hand on her shoulder steadying her steps. Rodi appeared before her. The usher who had blurted about the scanner earlier rushed forward, flustered but determined, and held out a program. His eyes flicked to her, not with disdain now but with something like apology. She took the program gently, nodded thanks, and sat. The velvet seat cradled her like a luxury she wasn't supposed to know, yet she belonged to it, as surely as anyone else in the hall. Her father placed his cello case beside her for a moment, unlatched it, and lifted the instrument free. The Polished wood glowed amber under the lights, as if it carried fire within it. He leaned closer. "Listen," he whispered. The same word he had said to her years ago when he taught her that silence was part of the music. She nodded, throat tight. And he stepped toward the stage dot as he disappeared into the wings. The lights dimmed. Murmurs died. A conductor strode out. Applause swelled and ebbed. And then a single violin thread unspooled, high and tremulous, pulling the hall into its spell. Her chest tightened, the way it always did at the beginning of something greater than herself. But she wasn't alone in feeling it. Back outside, rain drummed harder on the steps. The veteran shifted his cane and pulled his jacket tighter, though the water soaked through in seconds. He didn't move away. He listened. Somehow, even through the walls, the music carried a vibration, a suggestion. The boy with the bag of crumbs crouched against the column, hugging his knees, wide eyes shining as he tilted his head toward the sound. The homeless man stirred in his pretend sleep and let the rain wash his face, not brushing it away. And the dog-old, tired Rex lifted his muzzle, ears twitching, as if the cello were calling to something in his bones. Inside. When her father's bow finally touched string, the hall bloomed with a note so rich and human, it seemed to open the ribs of everyone listening. Conversations stopped in minds, hearts leaned forward. The girl pressed her palms together in her lap, holding back tears. Every vibration from that stage traveled through the air into her chest, where it struck with the force of recognition. This is what love sounds like when it has no words left. The audience applauded in waves, but not the same kind of applause that had greeted the conductor. This was softer, more reverent, as though they had glimpsed something fragile and wanted to honor it without breaking it. Near the back of the hall, Vale sat in his seat, expression unreadable. His jaw was tight, but he didn't look away from the stage. He adjusted his cufflinks once, twice, as though the repetition might steady him. No one noticed, except perhaps the janitor who had slipped in quietly and leaned against the wall, mop forgotten. She was watching him, not the stage, and something in her eyes suggested she knew the sound of a man whose certainties were being pried loose one string at a time. The girl leaned back, eyes closing just for a moment, and let herself sink into the tide of sound. She didn't care if anyone still stared. She didn't care if whispers followed. She was here. The music was here. And for the first time all night, she felt the wall between light and shadow tremble. Outside, the storm broke. Wide open, washing the marble steps clean. The veteran smiled into the downpour, whispering something only the rain could hear. The boy stretched out a hand, catching drops in his palm, laughing quietly as if rain itself were a gift. Rex pressed close against the veteran's leg, no longer. Trembling, eyes half closed, letting the thunder roll like distant drums. And still, inside, the cello played when the last note dissolved into silence. The hall held its breath. It wasn't the forced hush of etiquette, but the stillness that lingers when people realize they've been moved and don't quite know what to do with it. Then, as if by instinct, applause erupted fierce, rising, waves crashing against the stage. The girl was on her feet with the others, her palms stinging, her chest so full she could hardly breathe. On stage, her father bowed, sweat shining at his temples, his gray hair damp from effort. He looked out into the flood of faces, and when his gaze found hers, even from that distance, she felt seen. The noise of the hall dimmed in her mind, and for a heartbeat, there was only the two of them. Bound by music stronger than any wall or word, the conductor gestured, and the orchestra stood. Curtains closed slowly, applause dimming, until the house lights brightened and the spell reluctantly released its hold. People murmured about encores and after-parties, drifting toward the aisles. Sequins glittered as women adjusted shawls. Men checked their watches. For them, the night was already shifting into another obligation. But for her, the night had only just begun. She waited, clutched by the crowd as it poured toward the lobby. then slipped to the side aisle where performers exited, the usher with flushed cheeks spotted her and nodded discreetly, guiding her toward the stage door. She whispered thanks and slipped through. The hallway backstage smelled of wood polish and resin, the hum of conversation and laughter bouncing off painted walls. Musicians packed away instruments, their voices weary and light with relief. She threaded through until she saw him, the familiar curve of his shoulders as he slid the cello back into its case. "Dad," she breathed. He looked up instantly. His smile was tired but unbroken, the kind of smile she had memorized from childhood. "You made it," he said, though he had already known. She crossed the space quickly, and though she tried to hold back, tears came anyway. He let her fold into his chest, holding her with the same gentleness he used when cradling the cello. "I almost didn't," she whispered into his shirt. "They didn't want to let me in." His jaw tightened over her head. "I saw. They said I didn't look like." She stopped, breath catching. "You look like my daughter," he said firmly, pulling back to study her face. "That's more than enough." She laughed a little shaky and wiped her cheeks. "Your music, it was beautiful. It was everything." His eyes softened. Music tells the truth when people won't. He closed the case, latched it, and hefted it by the handle. "Come on. Let's get out of here before the rain drowns us." They stepped out the stage door into the alley, where the storm was still alive, rain running in silver rivers under the streetlights. And there waiting, as if the storm itself had called them, stood the veteran with his cane, the dog leaning against his leg. The boy crouched on the steps, plastic bag soggy in his lap, crumbs ruined. The homeless man still huddled under the awning, clothes plastered to his thin frame, but his eyes were open now. Watching, the father paused, lifting his face to the rain, then turned to his daughter. "These are the people who saw you," he said quietly. "Never forget who witnesses you when others refuse." She stepped closer to them. The boy grinned shyly, holding up the bag as though it still had something worth sharing. She knelt, met his eyes, and took a piece of broken cookie between her fingers. "Thank you," she said softly. He blinked at her, startled, then beamed. Wide and certain. The veteran tipped his chin. "Hell of a show," he said. Her father chuckled. "Coming from you, that means something." Rex wagged his tail once, slow but steady, and the girl reached out to touch his wet fur. The dog leaned into her hand, sighing. For a moment, all the walls of the city, between rich and poor, light and shadow, felt thinner. From across the square, the limousine door slammed, sharp against the storm. Vale stepped out, umbrella in hand, his shoes untouched by puddles. He glanced at them, father, daughter, strangers huddled together in the rain. His mouth curved, not quite a smile, more a smirk of dismissal, as though the moment meant nothing. Then he slipped into the car, glass rising to shield him from the weather. The veteran spat into the gutter. The boy made a face. The father only shook his head, tightening his grip on the cello case. "Come on," he said again. "Let's walk." So they did, through rain that washed the city clean for one fragile night. Behind them, the glow of the concert hall burned bright, but ahead, the street stretched long and dark, waiting. And in that darkness, for the first time, the girl felt a spark of light that was hers to carry forward. Rain braided the alleys into silver ropes, and the four of them, father, daughter, the veteran with his dog, and the boy with the ruined cookies, walked together as if the weather itself had organized them into a line. The city was quieter in the downpour. Headlights smeared into watercolor. Sirens drifted from far off and lost their nerve before they reached this block. "Name's Harris," the veteran said after a while, the way men say their names when they don't offer more unless you ask. "This old guy is Rex." "Lena," the girl said. She hadn't meant to give it, but her father had called her that so openly, the name felt already in the air. "And this is my dad." "Gabriel," her father said. shifting the cello case to his other hand. The boy walked a step behind, watching their feet negotiate puddles. "I'm Malik," he said into his collar. He kept one hand on the plastic bag, even though there was nothing left in it that would survive the rain. They reached the end of the block, where steam rose from a grate like the city was remembering how to breathe. Under a canopy, a woman in a green work jacket stood wringing out a mop head into a bucket, the mop strands like a gray wig in her hands. She looked up as they approached, and the sternness on her face cracked open. "Malik." She didn't scold. She just let the name carry relief and the faintest reprimand, the kind you save for children you love. "What did I tell you about waiting near the main doors when it rains?" "Gran." He stopped, embarrassed suddenly to be small. "I was listening." The woman's eyes took in the group in a sweep, the veteran's soaked coat, the dogs. Ribs under damp fur, the man with the case and the girl with rain on her lashes. She was the janitor from the hall, the one who had sent for the stage manager. Up close, the name stitched on the jacket read INEZ. There was fatigue in the way she stood, but it rode a backbone that wasn't going anywhere. "You're the cellist," she said to Gabriel, not as a compliment, but as a fact that fit where facts should. "And you're the daughter who made a door learn manners." Lena smiled before she could stop herself. "Inez," she said, trying the name on her tongue. "Thank you for earlier." Inez waved it off, the way people do when the thing they did felt like the smallest thing compared to what needed doing. "The city's not going to change on its own," she said. "It never has." She shifted her weight, and her knees made a small sound. "Malik, baby, your inhaler's where it always is?" He patted his pockets and then looked like a kid who knows an answer and doesn't like it. "At home." Inez closed her eyes for a second. "Lord help me." She looked at Harris. "You and the dog been out in this mess all night." Harris lifted a shoulder. "Rain's better than a shelter that says no dogs. Or says yes for the people with prettier problems," Inez said, like she'd heard that line too. She reached into her pocket and came out with a folded sandwich bag. Inside was a half peanut butter sandwich wrapped in a napkin. She offered it to Harris, who shook his head once. She didn't withdraw it. She turned and held it out to Lena without explanation. Lena took it and handed it to Malik. He took a bite like he hadn't planned to, then a second like he had. "Thanks," he said around the bread. "Eat." Inez touched the back of his head with her fingertips, light and quick. "You look like the breeze could carry you away." They gathered under the awning of a shuttered cafe with fern decals on the windows. On the glass, someone had taped a notice: "Renovations pending. Luxury coffee concept coming soon. Gabe's." Gaze snagged on the word luxury. We put luxury in front of any word, he thought, and it becomes a license. Harris rubbed Rex's chest and the dog leaned his considerable weight up against him, soaking his jeans. "We tried the shelter on 9th, Harris said. "They said the kennels are full. Tried the veterans hostel on 12th. They said come back with a letter." He laughed without humor. "Letters are the walls we build when we run out of bricks, letters, forms, waiting lists," Inez said. "I got a file folder for a life I already lived." She looked up into the rain. "I clean their floors and they raise my rent to pay for the cam." She groped for the word and found it, sour in her mouth. "Chandeliers." "Your landlord," Gabe said, and it wasn't a question. "New owner. Bought the whole block. No pets, no noise, no children after 8. I am 3 violations just getting out of bed." She lifted her chin, daring anyone to claim she was wrong. "They send notices in envelopes with windows, so even before you open it, it's bad news. Today's says renovations. That's always just a fancy word for go." Wind pushed the rain sideways for a moment. Cars hissed by. From the direction of the hall, the last clusters of patrons hurried toward parking lots, umbrellas blooming like cautious flowers. "Where's his mother?" Harris asked gently, nodding at Malik. "Work. Inez said. Night shift at the laundry. An inhaler's a copay we buy by skipping dinner. She reached for a laugh and found something else. I keep telling him to stay inside when my shift runs late. He says the music carries out here better than in the stairwell. She tilted her head toward Lena. He's not wrong. Malik had stopped eating. His attention had shifted to Rex, who had taken to watching him with that watchfulness dogs reserve for the smallest thing that might matter. Can I ask him? Harris said that. Malik stuck out his hand, palm down, the way someone had taught him, and waited. Rex sniffed, considered, and then rested his chin on the boy's wrist. Malik smiled like he'd been allowed to hold a comet. The rain came harder, drumming like fingers on tin. Inez pulled Malik closer under the awning, tucking him in, the sandwich bag crackling between them. Harris set his cane against the wall and worked at the strap on Rex's collar to loosen it. Big hands gentle. Gabe shifted the case to shield Lena's shoulder from the spray. These were the small arrangements people make to survive weather, real and metaphorical, and no one had to say a word to choreograph them. From the mouth of the alley, a flashlight beam cut across the wet pavement. A security truck idled there, 2 men inside, the kind who are sent to say mess belongs to somebody else's street. The passenger leaned out the window. Sidewalk sweep at 5, he called. No camping. No camping, Inez said under her breath. Like we're out here by choice roasting marshmallows on a trash can. We're moving, Harris said, calm as ever, as if calm could be armor, just waiting the worst of it. 5, the man repeated, not hearing or not meant to hear. The truck moved on, leaving the smell of diesel and the rhythm of its wipers behind. Letters and clocks, Harris murmured. The city's learned to make cruelty procedural. Lena looked down the street toward the concert hall's glowing facade. People like Vale would be inside now, drying off, shrugging into coats held for them by someone paid to know their size. Upstairs, in a room with good acoustics and bad chairs, Gabe would be signing programs and telling donors thank you with a voice that had to sound sincere to keep the orchestra afloat. But he was here, in the rain, the case heavy and right at his side. She felt a strange steadiness in her chest. That didn't belong to the hall at all. The first cough came out of Malik, almost like a hiccup. He slapped a hand to his chest and tried to make it look like nothing, which is how children ask for help without believing they deserve it. Hey, Inez said instantly, her palm on his back. Look at me. Slow, in through your nose. Malik nodded, which is not how breathing works, and dragged for air. The rain had driven grit into the air. The night was damp enough to drink. His next cough folded him and stayed. Harris straightened, and Rex's whole body changed, ears up, eyes bright, a quiet alertness settling into his bones like a remembered drill. Inhaler, Inez said, already knowing the answer. At home, Malik wheezed, apologizing and suffocating. In the same breath, hold on, Harris said, not to the boy but to the whole moment, as if it were a bolting horse he could calm. He crouched with the slowness of a man making a bargain with his knees, and put his hand on Malik's shoulder, heavy enough to ground. Rex, he said, and he didn't raise his voice. He just said the name in a way that always meant we have a job. Rex leaned in, nose at Malik's mouth, reading the air the way a sailor reads a sky. He nudged Malik back against the wall so the boy's shoulders hit something solid. He pressed his head under Malik's dangling hand, as if to say, hold on to this if you can't hold on to breath. Harris, Lena said, already searching her bag the way a person does when she's determined to conjure what she doesn't have. I don't, backstage, Gabe said, as if a thought had found him rather than the other way around. They keep a kit. Martina keeps everything because we never know what we'll need. Martina? Inez asked. Stage manager, Gabe said. He looked at Lena, and there was a question in his eyes disguised as a statement. I'll go. I'm faster, Lena said, already moving. Because once a girl has learned to push through a door that doesn't want her, there are other doors that feel less impossible. Where? Gabe pointed, and she ran, the solace of her shoes slapping. Water back at the night. She disappeared around the corner, the way rain disappears into itself. Malik's cough went ragged, sharp at the edges. His eyes were huge with effort, and he made that small sound bodies make when they're not getting what they need. Inez held him and spoke nonsense with her best voice. Baby, 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 listen. To me, because sometimes the meaning doesn't matter as much as the music. Harris breathed with the boy, slow and theatrical, offering a cadence to mimic. Rex stayed pressed in, the weight of him a hammer nailing panic to the ground. The security truck turned the corner again, slow as a shark. The driver leaned out. No loitering, he announced to a group of people who had stopped being an abstract. Bylaw exactly 2 minutes ago. Call an ambulance, Inez snapped, her eyes cutting to him. He's having an attack. We're not medical, the man said, which has always been one of the ways people say no. Harris didn't look at him. He kept counting under his breath, his hand carefully heavy on the small shuttering back. 1 and 2 and 3. The stage door banged open like a cymbal and Lena stumbled into the alley with a red case in both hands. Behind her, the stage manager, short, unflappable, with a headset trellised over her hair, followed, carrying a bigger kit and an authority that parted rain. Move, Martina said. She wasn't loud, but the word had edges. She knelt, hands quick, eyes already on the boy's mouth, the pale flutter at his throat. Asthma? Inez nodded, breathless. Inhalers at home. Okay. Martina cracked open the kit and pulled an inhaler and spacer free like a magician pulling a rabbit from a hat, except this trick was learned in a different school. We got you, kiddo. Put this over your mouth. Breathe in slow. She didn't. Say it like a test. She said it like a promise. Malik did his best, which is all anyone ever has to do. The medicine kissed his lungs, the spacer hissed softly, and the night shifted again. He took another breath, and another. The cough backed off, grudgingly, like a thug who'd been told the cops were coming. There you go, Martina murmured. There you go. She kept a hand on his shoulder, even when he could sit up on his own. Because leaving hands where they help is part of knowing your job. She looked at Inez and then at Harris. I'm Martina. Inez said, which felt inadequate. Thank you. That's why we keep the kit, Martina said, as if that explained anything about compassion. She glanced at the security truck and gave a thin smile. You can go, she told the men inside, unless you plan to do something useful. The driver revved his engine in a way he must have thought was brave and rolled on. Malik took another breath that sounded like a person owning air. He leaned his head against Inez's side, exhausted in the sweet, heavy way that follows catastrophe averted. Rex pulled back some and yawned, the sudden contagious kind, and shook himself, flinging a ring of water like glitter. You okay? Lena asked, breathless from the run, knees damp, hair stuck to her face. She looked young the way young is when it's been asked to be old for an hour. Malik nodded, embarrassed now that he could afford to be. Thanks, he said, and then, quieter, sorry. Don't be sorry for needing help, Inez said. That's the whole point of people. Martina packed the kit back with the tidiness of someone who believes things should be where they're supposed to be. She gave Lena a look, some mixture of approval and warning. That door you ran through? It's supposed to lock. It didn't, Lena said. It did, Martina said. You just didn't let it matter. She stood, joints popping. You all right to get home? Inez's mouth tightened, not from pride but from arithmetic. We'll make a plan. Harris cleared his throat. There's a church basement on Laurel that lets folks sit out storms if you're quiet, he said. They don't like dogs, but Father Miguel pretends he can't read the sign when it's raining. Inez nodded, cataloging this like a secret street only a few maps show. She put a hand on Horace's forearm, brief and deliberate. "Thank you." Gabe hadn't said anything for a while. He'd been watching Lena, the way a parent watches a new muscle form in a child balance. Judgment, the willingness to move toward trouble instead of waiting to be asked. He exhaled slowly, then turned to Harris. "Listen," he said. "I don't have cash. I mean, I do, but it won't solve the night. I have a little apartment 8 blocks from here. It's not much. It's upstairs, and it leaks when the wind comes from the east. But it's dry, and the radiator wants very badly to be a good radiator." He waited, because offering without waiting is just talking. "I'm not saying forever," he added. And the word hung there like a bell. "I'm saying tonight. I'm saying get warm." Harris looked at him the way men do when pride and need collide, a quick and private battle that leaves no bodies, but many ghosts. Rex set his paw on Harris's boot like a vote. Harris's face softened almost imperceptibly. "We won't get in your way," he said. "You'll be in our way exactly as much as you need to be," Lena said before she could think to soften it. Inez's eyes went shiny. "I can't take you up on that," she said reflexively, tilting her head toward the building with the green sticker threatening renovations. "They're watching. They always are. 1 visitor past 10, and they write you up. 2, and they pin a notice to your door with a staple gun, like you're a poster for a concert you can't afford." She tucked Malik in tighter. "But maybe we can walk with you to Laurel. Then we'll walk," Gabe said. "I've carried heavier on worse roads." They set off, the 5 of them and the dog, under a rain that had decided to be steady rather than vindictive. Streetlights puddled in the asphalt. A bus roared by empty, its driver staring straight ahead with the concentration of someone crossing an invisible border dot as they walked. The city offered up its little altars, a memorial candle guttering inside a jar on the stoop, a pair of shoes locked to a pole, a hand-lettered flyer for a missing cat whose eye was torn out by the weather but still seemed to look. They passed a storefront with a poster taped to the glass. "Community Meeting Redevelopment Plan Public Comment Welcome." The date was next week. The small print listed the sponsoring trust. Vale's name was there, neat and legal, alongside a rendering of the future, smooth white buildings where the messy old ones had been. A plaza with trees, placed exactly where shade would be photogenic. "Welcome," Harris said flatly, reading the words that hide barbed wire. Inez looked at the poster like it had called her by a name she doesn't use anymore. "He's going to buy the air and charge us for breathing it." "Not if people talk," Lena said. "Talking is what they let us do when they've already decided," Inez said. "But maybe we can make them hear themselves." Rex stopped suddenly, nose up, pulling a thread of scent from the wet air. He whuffed low, and Harris followed the line of the dog's interest to a man crouched under a narrow overhang farther down. It was the homeless man from the column. His clothes were a darker dark now, plastered to his bones. Cardboard sign collapsed on itself. His eyes were open, staring at nothing specific. "Leon," Harris called softly. The man didn't startle. He came back from wherever he'd been standing alone in his head. "Storm," he said, voice rusty. "It always reminds me of Kansas. Except the rain here smells like metal." "Come with us," Harris said, as if invitations do not expire. "Church basement on Laurel." Leon looked at the dog, at the girl, at the old woman, and the boy, and the man with the case. He looked toward the hall, which was just aglow now, as if acknowledging that a different story had been playing all evening, and somehow, this was the one he'd been written into. He put his hands on the ground to push himself up. It took longer than pride wants it to, but he did it. They went on, a slower river now, picking up pieces of their own city as they moved. Lena fell into step beside Harris. "How long were you K9?" she asked. 3 tours, he said. 2 with a badge, 1 without. He smiled a little. "Rex did most of the work. What did he do?" She asked. "Found what people lost," Harris said simply. Found what people hide. He knows the difference between afraid and dangerous. Wish more folks did. Ahead, the church's cross rose out of the dark like a suggestion, not a command. The basement door was propped open with a brick, light pooling at the threshold. A hand-lettered sign read, "Come in out of the rain." Someone had written underneath in smaller letters, "We mean you." Father Miguel stood at the top of the stairs in a sweater that had seen too many winters and not enough closets. He looked at the dog first, because that would decide the rest, and then at the faces behind the dog, and nodded like a man agreeing with a conclusion he was hoping to reach. "Kitchen's open," he said. "If you want broth, say when." He looked at Inez. "You look like you'll say no until you can't. Don't." Inside, the basement smelled like coffee and wet wool and something simmering that promised more than it would deliver. There were cots stacked against the wall and a bin of clean socks with a sign that said "Take Two." Someone had left a guitar in the corner with only 5 strings. In one corner, a bulletin board displayed pictures of lost dogs and lost jobs with phone numbers to call. They found a place near the radiator that wanted very badly to be good. They set the case against the wall. They peeled off coats and shook water into a darkening circle on the concrete. Rex lay down with a sigh that belonged in a nicer room. Malik cupped the steam from a paper cup like it was gold. Leon held his hands over the radiator and looked like he might cry if anyone said anything kind, so no one did for a minute. Gabe took the cello out not to play, just to check the wood and the seams, to make sure the rain hadn't worked a mischief it would regret. He ran a cloth along the curve and felt the instrument relax under his hands the way living things relax when they know they're safe. Lena sat on the floor with her back to the warm metal, knees up, eyes on the little world they had made between a radiator and a stack of cots. There was no chandelier here, no velvet. But the light was soft anyway. It touched faces more gently. And of all the rooms the city had offered tonight, this one felt most like a promise. She looked at Harris, who had closed his eyes not to sleep, but to inventory the noises of a room you can rest in. She looked at Inez, who was counting Malik's breaths without looking as if she were counting them. She looked at Leon, who had taken off his hat and revealed hair matted by rain and a skull that told the truth about hunger. She looked at Rex, who watched everything without judgment, head on pause, ready to do the next right thing. Something shifted in her, then not a grand revelation, just a small gear clicking into a larger gear, about who belongs where. And how belonging is a thing you can offer someone with your body, your time, your seat, your door, your name. Earlier tonight she had held up a ticket and asked to be let in. Now she understood there are places you build by letting other people in first. Through the basement window, rain lined the glass in bright threads. The city beyond was invisible and very close. Someone laughed at the far end of the room, a tired laugh that contained an entire day and still chose to make a noise for it. Father Miguel set a pot on the table, and steam rose like the beginning of a song. Gabe angled the cello against his shin and plucked one string, soft enough that only the little circle around him could hear. The note hung in the warm air like a beacon low, sure, with a sweetness at the tail you could miss if you weren't listening for it. Rex's ears flicked. Malik smiled into his cup. Inez closed her eyes and did not count anything for 2 full seconds. Lena leaned her head back and let the radiator hum through her. She thought of the hall's chandelier and the way it threw light like money, and of this bulb with its chain pull hanging over a table where a pot steamed and a man of God in a sweater had written a sign that said, "We mean you." She thought of Vale's poster and the little box with his name in it. She thought of doors, the kinds that scan and beep, the kinds that stick, the kinds that open because someone stands in front of them and says, "There is room." Outside, the rain eased not much, but enough to change its sound. The city recalibrated, as it always does after it has tried to drown you and then thinks better of it. On a different block, a limousine idled. In an office somewhere, A letter was being printed with a window in the envelope. On a community bulletin. Board near a laundromat, a pen hung from a string, waiting to fill in a sign-up sheet for people who still believed meetings could change things. Tomorrow. Inez said, not to anyone in particular, I'm going to that meeting. Me too, Lena said, before she knew she would. Me three, Harris added, eyes still closed. Dave smiled at the floor. I'll bring the only thing I know how to carry. Leon looked up, surprised at himself for wanting what he wanted. If there's coffee, he said, I'll come. Father Miguel, who had the hearing of a man who's learned to eavesdrop on hope, called from the other end of the room, there will be coffee. Rex thumped his tail twice, decision made. The radiator clicked, the pot bubbled. The rain softened. Another degree. Lena held her hands over the heat and felt the night unclench its fist around her ribs. Someone tugged the guitar's remaining strings into a chord that was not quite pretty and still did the job. The basement door opened and a woman let in two kids with backpacks, shaking water off them like dogs, laughing despite it. And there it was, the odd thing. The unexpected one that wasn't negative at all but pulsed with possibility. The retired police dog curled around a boy and dreamed with one eye open. A veteran who counted breaths. A janitor who had decided to go to a meeting. A homeless man who could still say yes. A cellist who knew that sometimes the concert you remember is the one in a church basement with a pot of broth, one good note, and the kind of quiet that belongs to the living dot above them. The city shifted in its sleep. Somewhere a notice slid through a slot and landed on a rug. Somewhere else, a woman in sequins hung her dress on a padded hanger and forgot the shape of the night. But here, between concrete and steam, a small thing had happened that would not quit being itself in the morning. Lena closed her eyes and saw the door at the hall again. How it had hesitated and then beeped because a truth had been presented to it with patience. She wondered what sound a different kind of door might make when it opened. Maybe no sound at all. Maybe just the sound of water letting go of eaves. Maybe the low note of a cello, steady as weather. Maybe a dog's tail on a concrete floor. Thump, thump, a Morse code that said, now, come in. You're allowed. She didn't know what tomorrow would be. She never had. But she knew she'd stand where she had to and say the smallest word. With the largest mouth she could make. Yes. The church basement quieted as people settled into their borrowed corners, some on cots, some on folded jackets, some just leaning back against the walls, as though stone itself might hold them. The storm outside had thinned into a drizzle. Every so often, the drainpipe gurgled, coughing up what the roof no longer wanted. Lena lay awake on her side, knees tucked to her chest. Across from her, Malik had finally dozed off, his breathing uneven but steady enough that Inez allowed herself to close her eyes. Harris had stretched out with Rex curled along his spine, dog and man breathing in near unison. Leon sat propped against the radiator, eyelids heavy, as if sleep was a luxury he still wasn't sure he was allowed to touch. Her father sat with the cello between his knees, the bow resting loose in his hand. He wasn't playing, just holding. The way some people hold a prayer book after the service is over, because it anchors them to a thing they're not ready to leave behind. You should sleep, Lena whispered. He smiled at her, tired and luminous all at once. I've slept through enough storms. This one deserves company. She wanted to answer, but her throat ached. The day had stretched her thin, left her raw in ways she hadn't expected. The words doesn't look like she could afford it kept circling in her head, ugly and sharp. Yet when she looked around this basement, she realized she wasn't carrying them alone. Each of the people here had their own scar carved by some version of that sentence. Too old, too poor, too black, too tired, too broken, too something, and still they were here, together. She shifted onto her back, staring at the water-stained ceiling. The hum of the radiator mixed with the distant drip of rain and the faint vibration of the cello's strings, as if the instrument itself was remembering the notes from earlier. It was a lullaby with no melody, only the sound of things surviving. When she finally slept, she dreamed of doors, hundreds of them, swinging open in unison, each one making the same clean, undeniable beep. Morning didn't arrive with sunlight so much as with noise. The rattle of carts in the street, the groan of buses on wet asphalt, a church bell stubbornly ringing even though half the city ignored it. Father Miguel shuffled in with a dented pot of oatmeal, whistling tunelessly. "Breakfast," he announced. "Don't ask what kind. It's the kind that fills you, that's all." People stirred. Malik rubbed his eyes and blinked like someone surfacing from deep water. Inez tucked his hair back, kissed his forehead once, then rose to help ladle the bowls. Harris sat up slow, joints protesting, and Rex shook himself awake with a sneeze that made two kids laugh. Leon still hadn't moved, but his eyes were open, and when Lena offered him a bowl, he took it without a word. They ate in silence, spoons clinking softly. It wasn't good oatmeal, too thin, too bland, but it was hot, and the steam curled into their faces like forgiveness. When they finished, Gabe set down his empty bowl and leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "We should talk about last night," he said quietly. Everyone stilled. He looked at Harris, then Inez, then Leon. "What happened at the hall wasn't just about me or my daughter. It's about every one of us who's been told, you don't belong. They'll keep saying it, unless someone answers. Answers how?" Leon's voice was hoarse from disuse. "You think they're listening? They're listening to money," Harris muttered. "They always do. And to silence," Inez added bitterly. "Our silence is the only song they hear." Lena swallowed. "Then maybe it's time we make a different sound." Her words hung there. She hadn't planned to say them, but now that they were out, she couldn't take them back. Harris studied her, his gaze slow and deliberate. Then he nodded once. "She's right." Inez set down her spoon with a click. "That community meeting. The one Vale's name is plastered on. We go. We don't just sit and nod. We talk, loud enough that they can't pretend they didn't." "Here. They'll ignore us," Leon said, but his voice had less iron in it than before. "Maybe," Gabe said. "But they won't forget us. Not if we stand together." Rex thumped his tail as if to vote yes. Malik grinned faintly still. Pale but stubborn. "We should go," he whispered. "All of us." And in that basement, in the hum of the radiator and the smell of burnt oatmeal, something small shifted. Not a revolution, not yet. Just the decision that tomorrow, when the city tried to close its doors again, they would show up at the threshold. And knocked out the meeting was still days away, but the decision already carried weight. It hung in the basement like an invisible banner, something to reach for when the hours sagged heavy. By afternoon, the rain had dried to a gray haze. The group spilled back into the city, dispersing the way streams do after flooding into a single river. Lena and her father returned to their small apartment with Harris and Rex in tow. Inez took Malik by the hand and guided him toward their block, promising Father Miguel she'd come back if the landlord pushed too hard. Leon lingered behind, staring at the open basement door as though afraid stepping away would erase the welcome. Written there, Gabe pressed his palm to the cello case as they walked. "Part of me wants to play in that meeting," he said. "But another part knows they'll hear a bow across strings and think it's background music." "Then maybe you play," Harris said, "but not for them. For us." Lena looked sideways at him. "You really think it'll matter?" "Doesn't matter what I think," Harris said. "Matters what we do." That night, in Gabe's apartment, Harris sat in a chair by the window while Rex lay across his boots. The radiator rattled weakly. From the kitchen, Lena's voice rose as she teased her father about his insistence on boiling water twice before making tea. Harris smiled at the sound. He'd been a sergeant once, steady hands guiding younger men through chaos. He'd worn medals that glinted under fluorescent lights in ceremonies that felt more like rehearsals than gratitude. And then he'd come home. The city hadn't known what to do with him. PTSD was a phrase the doctors used, but to Harris it felt more like a ghost standing behind him, whispering when he was tired. He stroked Rex's ears, fingers finding familiar grooves. Rex had been his partner in those final years, the one who understood commands better than most men. They'd been discharged together, though the paperwork said otherwise. Officially, Rex had been retired. In truth, he'd been discarded. Harris had refused to leave him at the kennel. They'd walked out into the city together, two old soldiers with no war left to fight. He whispered now, half to the dog, half to himself, "We've still got one more job." Rex lifted his head, eyes shining in the dim light. The look said he agreed. A few blocks away, Inez tucked Malik into their thin mattress. The boy's chest still wheezed faintly, but his breathing had steadied enough that she let herself exhale. She sat on the edge of the bed and stroked his hair, remembering nights when she herself was a girl in this same city, told to keep her voice down, told to stay out of sight. She had worked 3 jobs once: laundry, cleaning offices, selling tamales from a pushcart. She'd lost 2 of them when the building owners decided contracts were cheaper overseas. The third had worn her knees down to aching stone. "Gran." Malik mumbled, eyes half shut. "Why don't they like us?" She felt the sting in her chest but kept her hand steady. Some people think money makes them better. Some people think skin tells a story it doesn't. But they're wrong, baby. You hear me? They're wrong. Then why do they win? She leaned down, kissed his forehead. Because too many of us stop fighting. But maybe not this time. He drifted off, his small hand curled around the edge of her sleeve. Inez sat a long while in the dark, staring at the cracked ceiling, promising herself she'd walk into that meeting, even if her knees screamed. Leon shuffled back to the corner he called his. He carried a dry blanket someone at the church had insisted he take. It was thin, smelled of detergent and kindness. Once, he'd been a machinist. He'd owned a house in Kansas with a porch swing and a wife who hummed while she cooked. The layoffs had come slow at first, then all at once. Bills stacked, mortgage notices followed. The porch swing rotted in the rain. His wife left when the bank took the house. He hadn't blamed her. He told himself he'd moved to the city for work. That was 15 years ago. Now he sat under an overhang, blanket around his shoulders, listening to the hum of traffic. He thought of the girl at the concert hall, Lena, standing with her ticket and not backing down. He thought of the veteran who had called his name, as though Leon still mattered. For the first time in years, he wondered what it would mean to show up somewhere as more than a shadow. "Maybe," he muttered to himself, "I'll go to that meeting." The words felt fragile in the air, but he didn't take them back. In her narrow bed, Lena stared at the ceiling fan turning lazy circles. The insult from the guard still burned, but underneath it lived a sharper fire. She'd seen her father's music bring strangers to tears. She'd felt a church basement fill with warmth when people who'd been discarded leaned toward each other instead of away, and now she knew she couldn't unsee it. Her fists clenched in the sheets. "They're wrong," she whispered. "And they're going to hear it." Sleep finally came, heavy and certain. Outside, the city pulsed with its usual contradictions, wealth gleaming in towers, despair crouched in doorways. Somewhere, Vale reviewed blueprints in his office, red pen circling blocks like prey. Somewhere else, envelopes with windowed warnings slid under doors, announcing evictions dressed up as opportunity. But in one basement, in one small apartment, and in one fragile heart under a blanket, something new had taken root. It wasn't revolution yet. It was just a promise. And sometimes, a promise is the loudest sound a city can hear. The next morning tasted like metal and overboiled coffee. Lena wiped the bookstore counter with a damp rag that left streaks anyway and tried not to check her phone. Sasha, who wore eyeliner like armor and could alphabetize faster than any human should, slid a paperback across the counter and leaned in. "Your dad broke hearts last night," she said. "Gramophone-level talk. You see the clip?" "What? Clip?" Sasha unlocked her screen and pushed it across. A shaky video from outside the hall, rain glittering in the headlights. A guard's arm, a red scanner line, the beep. In the grainy middle of it, Lena's face jaw set, eyes steady. Comments crawled beneath. "Let her in. Money cops the door. She looks like all of us who've been told no. And also, probably fake, staged. If you can buy VIP, you can buy a coat." Lena's throat tightened. She handed the phone back like it was hot. "People will say anything when they don't have to stand there. People will also show up," Sasha said. "When they know where to go." Lena thought of the poster with Vale's name. "They'll know," she said. "We'll make sure." By noon, 3 customers had recognized the cellist's cheekbones in Lena's face and complimented her father. One of them added, "You must be so proud," and meant it in a way that was almost permission. Lena printed flyers on the bookstore's sputtering machine anyway. "Community meeting Tuesday. 7 p.m. Speak up before they sell your block." She taped one to the window, right next to a display of glossy coffee table books about urban renaissance. That made neighborhoods look like hotel lobbies. Across town, Harris stood in a line that moved the way vines grow imperceptibly. Beneath a V, a poster of a soldier hugging his daughter. Rex lay on his feet, eyes open, ears half-cocked. Each time the automatic door sighed, Harris's shoulders twitched and then eased. The man at the window spoke in bureaucratic commas. "You'll need Form 21526Z and a supporting statement from a licensed provider, which you can request in room 3B on Thursdays, unless it's a holiday, in which case." "I was there," Harris said softly. "I can tell you what I need." "Sir, I don't decide need," the man said, and in fairness, he didn't. When Harris stepped out, a truck backfired and the street peeled back to a dirt road that wasn't there. Heat and grit replacing drizzle. He blinked until the city reassembled itself, until the truck was just a truck again, and his breath belonged to this air. A toddler lurched off a stoop, aiming for a puddle that hit a deeper pothole. Harris's hand moved before thought, catching a coat hood, steadying without yanking. The mother spun, eyes wide and then wary. "I had him," she snapped. "You do," Harris said, letting go at exactly the right speed. Rex wagged once, the diplomatic kind of wag that says, "We come in peace." The mother muttered thanks into her collar and hauled the boy upstairs. Harris patted Rex's neck. "Everyone's fighting invisible things," he said. "Some of ours just have better aim." At the laundry, bleach made the air bright and harsh. Steam billowed from the presses, wrapping Inez's knees in damp heat as she fed sheets into a rolling mouth of metal. Malik sat in the back with homework and a borrowed inhaler Inez had coaxed from a neighbor with an extra. The landlord's nephew came in with a clipboard he held like a badge. "Inspection tomorrow," he said. "No animals, no guests after 8, no storage in hallways. We're enforcing, Ms. Alvarez." "You enforce like rain," Inez said, not pausing her hands. "It arrives and ruins plans." He glanced at Malik. "Crowding is a violation." "So is greed," she said, and only one of them flinched. At school, a teacher peered over Malik's worksheet, eyes softening into a frown. "You finished fast," she said, as if speed were a threat. "Let's be sure you didn't get help." "I did," Malik said honestly. "From my gran and the internet and the library." "Like you said." She smiled in a way that wasn't. "We'll redo it during lunch," she said. A boy 2 desks over whispered, "Not soft enough. My dad says kids like him don't need tests, they need fences." Nobody heard except 3 children and Malik. Which is to say the whole future heard it. Leon shaved in the public library's bathroom with a plastic razor that skittered over stubble like a cheap boat on a bad lake. He left the sink clean. He always did. He put on the collared shirt the church had in a box labeled interviews, and practiced not apologizing in the mirror. Day labor down on river, a man said by the bulletin board, not unkindly. They pay cash, no forms. Leon nodded. He went to the warehouse hotel ballroom anyway, where a banner read job fair in cheerful letters, and the woman at the registration table asked for an address and then a phone, and then a smile that wasn't pity but wanted to be. He gave his name in a voice that had forgotten how to carry, and when they turned him gently toward the door, he walked like he'd meant to leave all along. On the way out, he paused at a water cooler and drank until his chest hurt. He didn't think about Kansas until an old song tried to climb his throat, and he shoved it back down. Outside, a woman in a blazer lit a cigarette and looked at him like he was a story she'd tell that evening about the city's problems. He kept walking until she had nothing to see. Vale toward a model unit with floor-to-ceiling glass that refused to see the block beyond. "We'll lean into the safety messaging," his assistant said, ticking bullets in the air. "Lighting, patrols, welcoming streets. We'll seed testimonials." "Good," Vale said. "Keep the meeting cordial. Stack the sign-ups early. If they shout, we're the adults. If they're calm, we're the solution." "And the clip outside the hall?" the assistant asked. He adjusted his cufflink until it faced exactly the right direction. "A single anecdote is not data," he sighed. "Besides, I donate to the arts." He smiled, the kind that shrugged off gravity. "I'm what a city looks like when it's working." On the corner by the bodega, with a bell that rang for every customer like a tiny mercy, Lena taped a flyer to a pole already shaggy with causes. An old man in a Mets cap squinted at it. "You organizing?" he asked. "I'm inviting," she said. "Same thing," he said. "The trick is not to go alone." He lifted the bell-loud door and let it hit her shoulder lightly. A blessing. At dusk, the smell changed. Less rain, more hot metal cooling. Gabe boiled water twice and poured tea into mugs that didn't match, one with a chip shaped like a moon. Harris sat on the floor, back to the couch, with Rex's head in his lap. Lena spread handwritten notes across the coffee table. "Keep it under 2 minutes. Lead with story. Ask for specific commitments." She underlined commitment so hard the pen bit the paper. "You don't have to speak," Gabe told Harris. "I do," Harris said. "I'm tired of waiting for another man to explain me." He looked at Lena. "You're good at doors. I'm all right with rooms." Rex sprang to his feet suddenly, head up, nose high, every muscle and arrow. He moved to the window and whined, then pawed the sill and barked once, the sound sharp and clean. Harris was up before the echo landed. "What is it?" The answer rode up through the floorboards. A thin metallic tang, sweet and wrong. "Gas." "Not a lot. Not the kind that makes the air visible, but enough to thread the breath." Gabe's eyes cut to the stove, the knobs all squared off. Lena crossed the apartment in 2 strides, yanked the window, and cool evening rushed in. "Below," Harris said, already moving. "Downstairs." They pounded the stairwell, Rex's streak of gray, nails ticking. The second-floor landing held the smell like a hand stronger here. Harris banged on 2B, then 2A, then 2C. In 2A, a television blared. The kind of show that keeps people company when people don't. A chain slid, a door opened 2 inches, and I peeked. "Gas," Harris said. "Do you smell it?" "Smells like everything in this building," the eye said, but the chain rattled free anyway. A woman shuffled out, robe knotted, slippers ruined by time. I was making rice. In 2C, no one answered. Lena put her ear to the wood and heard a cough that wasn't quite a cough, a weak human sound. She tried the knob, turned. The air inside was white noise wrong. On a thrift store couch, a man in a maintenance uniform twitched in a dream that wasn't letting go. The burner hissed in the kitchenette, an invisible complaint. Rex went to the stove and planted himself between the hiss and the man. Harris. Crossed the room and turned the dial, then all the dials, slow, precise, the way you diffuse a memory. Gabe yanked the window, and it fought him because city windows do, and then it gave. Lena knelt, touched the man's shoulder. "Hey," she said. "Hey, sir." His eyes rolled up and then down into focus. He grabbed her wrist, confusion in the grip, then let go, embarrassed by the strength he didn't have. "I'm fine," he said reflexively. "You were," Lena said. "Now you'll be more fine in air." The building's super thundered up, keys jangling like guilt. "What's all this?" he demanded, then stopped mid-demand when the smell elbowed him. He looked from the open window to the stove to Rex. His chin dipped, thanks translated, into a nod because some men only speak 2 languages and gratitude isn't one of them. Carbon monoxide detector's been chirping. The woman from 2A said, "I took the batteries out. Couldn't stand it." "Bring me every detector," the super said, almost to himself. "I'll replace them, today." Out on the stoop, neighbors gathered in loose pajamas and tight expressions, trading rumors with names attached. Someone pointed at Rex. "Good boy," they said then to Harris. "Good man." The praise landed awkwardly, as if neither of them had worn it lately. By the time the street exhaled, word had already traveled farther than feet. The bodega bell jingled, voices slalomed around the story. "Dog smells gas. Vet saves man. Girl who got stopped at the hall runs like a siren without the noise." Stories are a city's circulatory system. Sometimes they carry oxygen. Lena texted Inez, "You okay?" A minute later, "Inspection notice today. We'll be there Tuesday." Then a third, "Thank you for last night." The words lit Lena's screen like a candle you can't blow out by accident. The next day slid sideways. At the laundry, a manager tacked a flyer to the corkboard. Redevelopment plan temporary shutdown for improvements. Inez read it 3 times and found new insult each time. Malik fished his inhaler from his pocket and squeezed her hand without looking up. "We're going to the meeting," he said, "because children sometimes answer questions you haven't had the breath to ask. At the church, Father Miguel hung a sign on the basement door that said "Open tonight for planning." 2 hours later, a man from the city taped another sign over it. "Temporarily close code violations." The ink was bureaucratic blue. Miguel pressed his lips together, peeled it off slowly, and taped both signs side by side. He wrote beneath, in a shaky block hand, "Meet in the sanctuary. God has codes too." Evening brought them together again. Lena and Gabe with their notes, Harris with his patience and his scars, Inez with a plastic folder of envelopes with windowed threats, Malik with his backpack and a knitted hat that made him look younger on purpose, Leon with a clean jaw and a tie dug from a thrift store bin that someone had ironed with care, and Father Miguel in the aisle with a handful of pens like weapons. They sat in the front pews because nobody wanted to pretend to be uninvolved. The stained glass glowed faintly in city light. The saints looked like people who would have understood a late bill. "We'll each get 2 minutes, Miguel said. "They say there'll be lots of speakers. 2 minutes is not an insult if you load it with truth. Truth is heavy," Harris said. "We'll need stronger knees." Gabe set the cello case beside him and rested his hand on the latches. "I'll play 30 seconds at the end," he said. "Not for show, for silence. People don't know what to do with silence. It makes them hear the thing inside their own head that they keep swatting away." Inez opened her folder and fanned the envelopes. "Visual aid," she said. "Every one of these is a month of my life I can't live again." She slid one to Malik. "You hold this one." "What should I say?" Malik asked. "Tell them what air feels like when you can't have it," Lena said, and wished she didn't know exactly how true that sounded. Leon cleared his throat. "I don't have an address," he said. "I keep not having an address." He lifted a hand and let it fall, a gesture that meant more than it looked. I'm going to say my name into their microphone like a man buying his own voice. They practiced out loud until the words lost their stiffness. They practiced pauses. They argued gently about which indignity mattered most and agreed, in the end, that the order didn't, because the point was to stack them so high, the room had to crane its neck. Miguel wrote 3 verbs on a scrap of paper and held it up. Listen. Answer. Commit. Rex wandered the aisle, accepting strokes from hands that needed to pet something living. He lay down finally with his head on Malik's sneaker, sighing in a way that made adults pretend they hadn't just melted. When they filed out into the cool, the church door hiccuped on its hinges. On the nearest pole, a fresh flyer flapped, still damp from a staple gun. Public safety update increased enforcement to address loitering and vagrancy. It bore the city seal and a familiar foundation logo. Vale's name rode the bottom corner. Like a watermark, Inez tore it down, slow and precise, as if speed would be surrender. She folded it into her folder of envelopes like a new kind of bill. Tomorrow, Harris said, a statement that borrowed the solidity of weather. We go early, we sit front. We go together, Lena said. They did not hug. They did not make speeches to themselves. They went home the way people go home when what waits there is small and stubbornly theirs. Night pushed its face against the windows. Somewhere up high, Vale rehearsed a smile that said calm while his team built a sign-up table that would run out of pens for the wrong people at the wrong time. Somewhere, a guard checked the charge on a scanner and wondered when. Beeps had started to sound like verdicts. Lena lay awake and rehearsed her 2 minutes into the ceiling. She trimmed it down until it could fit into the space a breath leaves, until only the bones were left. My name, what happened, who it's happening to, what we need, say it out loud. She fell asleep on the word need and woke with it in her mouth. Morning brought blue that couldn't decide if it meant rain. The city stretched and cracked its back. People in suits practiced neutrality. People with carts practiced persistence. A pigeon's chest flashed green for one ridiculous holy second. At noon, a new video found Lena's phone. The gas incident. A neighbor narrating badly over Harris's calm and Rex's certainty. Someone had written, "They take care of us while the city counts forms." Someone else had typed, "Bring the dog to the meeting." Lena laughed, sudden and pure. "We were going to," she told no one, and then to Harris when he answered, "They're asking for him." "Rex doesn't do politics," Harris said. "Then we're safe," Lena said. "He does truth." They met at the church in clothes that were clean even if they weren't new. Miguel handed each of them a pen and a program with the hymn numbers blacked out, as if holiness needed cover. They walked together toward the community center, past the poster with the rendering of the future, past the bodega where the bell rang again and again like practice. In front of the building, a line had already formed. Faces Lena knew and faces she didn't, a ribbon of intention stretching to the curb. On the steps, a camera crew tested sound levels. Inside, through the glass, she saw a long table with a white cloth, sign-up sheets, name tags. She saw Vale at the far end of the room, practicing presence. She felt her father's hand at the small of her back, a pressure that said both go, and I'm here. Rex shook his coat once, as if to say, ready. Harris rolled his shoulders until they found a place to rest. Inez squared her folder. Malik tucked the inhaler into a pocket and patted it the way you pat a pocket for keys before leaving. Leon rubbed his jaw, found a speck of stubble, and smiled at it like proof. They stepped forward together, and the door had no scanner, no red line, no sanctioned beep. It opened because bodies pressed it, because hinges are honest. If you maintain them, because a hand held it, and another hand after that. The quiet choreography of entry. Inside, the room hummed. Outside, the sky gathered itself. What came next would belong to part 3, the part where voices meet microphones and promises get measured out loud. But as Lena crossed the threshold, She understood something she hadn't the night at the hall. You don't wait for the room to be ready for you. You bring your own light and stand where you must until the room learns your shape. The community center's fluorescent lights hummed like restless bees. Folding chairs were lined in rows too neat for the crowd already spilling past them, neighbors. Shifting and murmuring, some carrying flyers like armor, others clutching eviction notices, inspection slips. Utility bills folded soft from too much handling. At the front sat the panel Vale in his immaculate suit. 2 city officials with faces rehearsed into neutrality, a developer's lawyer with a smile too sharp. They sat behind a table draped in white, microphones arranged like weapons. A banner above read, Community Redevelopment. Your voice matters. The capitalization of your seemed less like invitation and more like warning. Lena, Gabe, Harris, Inez with Malik Leon, and even Father Miguel slipped into the second row. Rex lay at Harris's boots, drawing whispers of admiration that traveled like sparks. A woman in pearls wrinkled her nose until a child behind her whispered loudly, "Good dog." The dog thumped his tail, and the room softened by a hair. Moderator cleared his throat. We'll hear first from Mr. Vale, whose foundation has generously sponsored this redevelopment effort. Vale rose with the poise of someone used to podiums. His voice was smooth, confident, just shy of paternal. Our goal, he said, is a safer, more welcoming city. New housing, improved lighting, better policing. Opportunities for families. This isn't about removing anyone, it's about raising standards. Applause trickled from a corner, stacked with his supporters, men and women in tailored coats, their name tags printed neatly in advance. But in the center rows, silence reigned. Heavy and suspicious, the moderator lifted his list. Community speakers now. Please keep remarks to 2 minutes. Names were called. A shopkeeper spoke of rising rents. A nurse told of losing her apartment after 20 years. A student recited statistics on displacement. Each voice rose, quavered, or cracked, but each was swallowed by the panel's polite nods. The endless jot of notes that meant nothing. Harris Row. The veteran pushed himself to his feet, cane steady in one hand. The room hushed. Rex rose too, pressing close. Harris didn't speak right away. He looked down the line of Vale, the lawyer, the officials, then at the crowd behind him. My name's Harris, he said finally. I fought in a war you all watched on TV, came home with 1 leg less and 1 dog more. They told me there'd be help. Forms, they said, letters, lines, but what I got was a shelter that said no dogs, a hostel that said come back with a letter. Rex here, he's found men under rubble, children in smoke, weapons buried in dirt. He found a gas leak in my building last week and saved a man's life. And your city would call him a nuisance. He let that hang. Rex shifted, nails clicking on linoleum. You say standards, I say lives, you say safety. I say we've been keeping each other safe while you count. Signatures. So I'm here to ask, commit to one thing. 1. A place where no one has to choose between a roof and their dog. Between a roof and their child. You commit to that, and I'll believe your word means something. Silence spread outward like a bzila. Ripple, people leaned forward. The lawyer opened his mouth, but Vale lifted a hand, smiling thinly, as if magnanimous in the face of theater. Thank you for your service, Mr. Rowe, he said smoothly. We will certainly take your concerns. Under advisement, murmurs of discontent stirred. Harris sat. Rex laid his head across the veteran's boots, eyes sharp. Next, Inez Alvarez. Inez rose, folder in hand. Malik stood beside her, clutching one envelope like a talisman. She flipped the folder open and let the audience see. Envelope after envelope, bills, notices, inspection slips. This, she said, voice fierce, is my life, one envelope at a time. Every month another warning, another violation, another rent hike. I work nights cleaning offices with marble lobbies while my grandson coughs at home. We skip meals to pay for his inhaler. And now you want to redevelop? I know what that means. It means new chandeliers while Inez Alvarez gets a notice taped to her door with a staple gun. Malik stepped forward, lifted his envelope with both hands. And sometimes, he said, voice trembling but clear, it means you can't breathe and nobody cares until you stop. The room murmured. Someone in the back clapped once, then again. Applause swelled, rough, uneven, real. Vale shifted, but his smile stayed in place. We're deeply sympathetic to individual hardships, not hardships, Inez cut in. Lives. More clapping. The moderator rapped the mic for order, Leon Mitchell. A ripple ran through the room as Leon rose. He'd shaved, his borrowed tie nodded clumsily, but his voice carried steady. I don't have an address, he said. I keep not having an address. That's why no one calls me when jobs open. That's why no form lets me through. But I have a name, Leon Mitchell. You write it down because I'm not disappearing. Not tonight. Not when you build your towers. Not ever. Applause again. Stronger. A chant flickered at the edges. Leon, Leon, but he raised a hand and it died, respectful. He sat, chest heaving, eyes wet but unashamed. The moderator cleared his throat, uneasy now. And finally Lena Varela. Lena stood. The hall seemed to tilt. Her father's hand brushed her arm, grounding her. She looked at Vale, at the panel, then at the faces neighbors, strangers, all watching. My name's Lena, she began. Last week, I bought a ticket, a VIP ticket. And when I showed up, they looked at my coat, my shoes, my skin, and told me I didn't belong. The scanner beeped. The ticket was real, but still they called me counterfeit. That word counterfeit has followed me all my life. Not rich enough, not light enough, not good enough. Always counterfeit. But last night, I sat in a church basement with a veteran, a janitor, a boy with asthma, a man without an address. We listened to a cello sing the truth about us. And here's the truth. We are not counterfeit. We are the city. You can evict us, shame us, ignore us, but we are still here. And we are not leaving. The applause was thunder this time. People rose to their feet. Cameras whirred. Vale's smile tightened, and for the first time, the polish cracked. Gabe rose without waiting to be called, lifted his cello, and without preamble drew his bow across the strings. A single note, low and resonant, filled the hall. It hummed through linoleum and plaster, into bone. The room stilled. The note lingered, then slid into another rising, pulling the air taut until silence broke into sobs, cheers, a chorus of clapping. When the sound faded, it wasn't silence. It was resolve. And in that charged moment, the line between light and shadow, patron and outcast, ticket holder and trespasser, wavered. For the first time in a long time, the city listened. The meeting ended in a chaos that felt like triumph. Reporters swarmed toward the front, microphones extended, camera flashes cutting the air like lightning. Vale's supporters huddled, whispering furiously, their rehearsed smiles trembling at the edges. Harris leaned on his cane, sweat shining on his temple, though the hall was cool. That's the first time I've seen them shut up, he muttered, nodding toward the panel. Rex pressed close, tail steady as a metronome. Lena's chest still vibrated with the cello's note. She had spoken into a microphone, and her words had not been taken away from her. That was new. That was dangerous. Come, Gabe said softly. Let's get out before they decide who to blame. Outside, the air was thick with humidity and voices. Neighbors slapped Harris on the back, pressed Inez's hand, tousled Malik's hair, clapped Leon on the shoulders. Someone shouted, "That's the girl from the hall." And another, "The veteran saved a man's life last week." Word moved faster than feet. The story was already bigger than any of them, but so was the pushback. A line of police cruisers idled at the curb. Officers leaned against them, arms crossed. Flyers from the meeting already littered the gutter, stamped into mud. On the far corner, a man in a clean polo shirt handed out glossy brochures stamped with Vale's logo. A safer tomorrow starts today. When Lena reached for one, he pulled it back. Sorry, he said, not sorry at all. Supplies limited. He handed the stack to a couple in suits who had said nothing all night. Harris barked a laugh, low and humorless. Doors and papers, he muttered. Always the same. They walked home together, smaller now, the crowd dispersing into alleys and buses and borrowed cars. By the time they reached Gabe's block, the adrenaline had ebbed, leaving only exhaustion. But exhaustion wasn't the worst of it. On Gabe's door, taped with blue painter's tape, was a notice. Inspection. Code violations pending. The paper was damp, edges curling, but the words were sharp. Fast, Inez whispered, clutching her folder tighter. Too fast. They're making examples, Harris said flatly. Scare the rest. Inside, Gabe set down the cello case with care, as though the wood itself had been accused. He read the notice twice, then let out a laugh that wasn't really a laugh. Violation for what? For letting people in? Yes, Harris said simply. Exactly that. Malik sat cross-legged on the floor, pulling Rex's ears, trying to hide the tears prickling his eyes. We didn't do anything wrong, he said. Wrong depends on who's writing the rules, Leon muttered from the window. His tie was loose now, his shoulders slumped. And they've got the pens. Silence sat heavy. For a moment, the fire from the meeting dimmed. The weight of retaliation pressed down, real and merciless. Then Lena straightened, voice sharp. So what? They put a notice on a door. They didn't stop us from speaking. They didn't stop anyone from hearing. She grabbed the notice, tore it down, crumpled it in her fist. We show up again. Louder. Tomorrow. The day after. Until they can't keep taping paper over our lives. Her father looked at her, at the tremor in her hands, at the blaze in her eyes, and saw a reflection of himself the first time he ever carried a cello on stage. Terror and resolve, woven tight. Inez exhaled. Then we'll need more than words. Harris nodded slowly. Then we organize. Outside, a patrol car rolled by, headlights sweeping the stoop. Inside, Rex growled low, a sound from deep in his chest, as if he knew this was only the beginning. The night stretched long, filled with whispered plans and unspoken fears. Somewhere, Vale sat in a leather chair, dictating responses that would sound compassionate while tightening the screws. Somewhere else, envelopes slid under doors with deadlines in red ink. But here, in one crowded apartment that smelled of wet coats and stubborn tea, people who had been told all their lives to be silent began to plot how to be heard again. The retaliation had begun. So had the resistance. The apartment was too small for so many people, but nobody left. The notice that had been taped to the door lay crumpled on the table like an enemy they all recognized. Rainwater still dripped from coats hung along the wall. The radiator hissed in complaint, trying to warm the space it could never quite reach. They spoke in fragments at first about lawyers, about petitions, about letters to editors. But the truth was, none of them trusted systems built on the same rules that had shut them out. Words like petition felt fragile, like paper left in the rain. It was Malik, curled on the rug with Rex's head in his lap, who finally said, "We can't fight if we don't know each other." The room quieted. His voice was soft, but the kind that made adults stop. "What do you mean, baby?" Inez asked. Malik shrugged, embarrassed but insistent. "I mean, we all told our stories in the hall, but we don't know." "Not really." He looked at Harris. "Why you and Rex are alone." He looked at Leon. "Why you don't have a house." Then he looked at Lena, cheeks pink. "Why you stood up even when they laughed." No one spoke for a long moment. Then Harris set his cane against the wall, rubbed a hand down his face, and exhaled. Fair enough. He shifted in his chair. The old wood creaking. I was military before I was police. Brought Rex home from Kandahar. He found 3 boys under rubble after an airstrike. 2 lived. That's more than statistics ever promised. But when we came back, the department wanted shiny young dogs, not gray muzzles. Wanted steady hands, not hands that shake some nights. They called it retirement. I called it being shelved. His voice roughened, but he didn't stop. So I took Rex and walked. Figured 2 discarded soldiers might as well keep each other company. Haven't regretted that part, not once. Rex wagged his tail, thumping the floor, as if confirming every word. Inez folded her arms, as if steadying herself. Me? I scrub at other people's bathrooms until my hands cracked. Raised my daughter in the cracks between shifts. She didn't make it through college. Too many bills. Now it's Malik I'm trying to carry, but the bills don't care whose name they put on the envelope. Sometimes I think the system's designed to see how much one woman can take before she breaks. Her eyes shimmered, but she blinked the tears back like someone too practiced. Malik squeezed her wrist, and she let the softness stay, just for a breath. Leon cleared his throat, his tie loosened now, his voice quieter than the radiator's hiss. I had a house once. White siding, porch swing. Wife who laughed at bad jokes. The factory closed. I thought I'd find something else before. The bank came, thought I'd keep her. One didn't. Kansas blew away, and I blew with it. Been drifting ever since. He looked at the floor. Sometimes I think if I sit still too long, I'll vanish. Like smoke. No one corrected him, or tried to soften it. They just sat in the weight of it together. Finally, all eyes turned to Lena. She felt her pulse hammering. I guess my story isn't so bad next to yours, she said quickly. Don't do that, Harris said, voice kind but firm. Pain isn't a contest. She bit her lip, then nodded. All right. My mom left when I was 7. My dad was always on the road with the orchestra. I learned how to look after myself. But I also learned how people look at you when they think you don't belong. The clerk at the store double-checking my bills. Teachers assuming I couldn't afford the trip. And last week, that guard at the hall telling me I didn't look like a VIP. Her voice caught. It wasn't just about a ticket. It was about every time someone decided what my life was worth by what they saw on the outside. Her father reached over, rested his hand over hers. His touch was light, but grounding. And you still stood, he said softly. I had to, she whispered. Otherwise I'd disappear too. Silence stretched, but this one wasn't heavy. It was close, almost tender, like a blanket drawn around them all. Then Malik broke it with a grin, gap-toothed and defiant. We're like a team, like the X-Men, but broke. Laughter erupted, rough and real. Even Leon chuckled, shaking his head. A team, Inez repeated, tasting the word. Maybe that's what we need to be, Harris nodded. We've all been fighting alone. Maybe it's time we stop. They stayed up late, sharing scraps of their lives. Not speeches this time, not performances for a microphone, just confessions and small kindnesses. Lena fetched extra blankets. Inez mended a button on Harris's coat with a needle she always carried. Leon told Malik about constellations he used to watch from his porch, tracing the stars with his finger in the dim lamplight. Gabe played a gentle melody on the cello, soft enough to let their voices thread through it. When sleep finally claimed them, they weren't just a cluster of outcasts in a cramped apartment. They were something harder to evict, a community, stitched together by pain, laughter, and the stubborn decision not to vanish. And Rex, curled in the middle of them all, lifted his head once, as if listening to the city beyond the walls. His ears twitched. His tail gave a single certain thump. Then he rested his muzzle on Malik's arm, as if to say, We're a pack now. Morning came with the sound of fists on wood. 3 sharp knocks rattled Gabe's apartment door. Then a fourth, harder. Everyone startled awake. Rex was up before the echo faded, hackles rising, a low growl vibrating from his chest. "City inspection," a voice barked from the hall. "Open up." Gabe moved first, pulling the cello case upright. Like instinct demanded he protect it. Harris reached for his cane, planting himself between the door and the others. Inez pulled Malik behind her. Leon sat frozen on the edge of the sofa, Ty still askew from sleep, his eyes darting like a cornered animal's. The knocks came again. Now, Gabe opened the door. 2 men in gray jackets stood there, clipboards in hand. Behind them, an officer leaned against the railing, arms folded. His gaze swept the room, catching the cluster of bodies. The blankets on the floor, Rex bristling at Harris's knee. "Overcrowding," one inspector said. He jotted a note without stepping inside. "Improper use of residential space. Unauthorized animal." His pen scratched faster than his eyes moved. "This is my home," Gabe said evenly. "They're my guests. Temporary sheltering isn't permitted without certification." The inspector's voice was flat, rehearsed. "Violations will be recorded. Fines assessed. Certification?" Inez spat. "You think life comes with a license?" The officer shifted, hand grazing his belt. "Ma'am," he warned. Rex barked once, explosive, making the air jump. Malik clutched the dog's neck, burying his face in the fur. "Enough!" Harris's voice cut clean through. He stepped forward, cane striking the floor. "You come in here with clipboards and pens and pretend you're just doing a job. But I know what this is. Retaliation. We spoke last night, and now you're writing us down like pests." The inspector didn't answer. He just tore a sheet from his pad and slapped it against the doorframe with a strip of tape. "Final warning." They turned and left, boots echoing down the stairs. Silence followed, sharp and trembling. Then Leon let out a shaky laugh that wasn't laughter at all. "They'll choke us with paper until we can't breathe." "No," Lena said fiercely, ripping the notice from the door. "We won't let them." But even as she said it, fear gnawed at her edges. By afternoon, the story broke wider. The clip of Harris speaking at the meeting hit social media, spliced with shaky footage of Inez holding up her envelopes and Malik's trembling words about air. Comments poured in. Some cheered them as heroes. Others sneered professional victims, fake sob stories. Why don't they just work harder? And then came the headline that made Lena's stomach drop. Safety concerns raised after disruptive protest at redevelopment meeting. Vale's Foundation had issued a statement, polished and sharp. "We support free speech, but disruptions jeopardize civil dialogue. Our team remains committed to building a safer, healthier city for all." The words dripped with poison hidden in sugar. Safer for who? Inez muttered, slamming the paper onto the table. "They're spinning it," Harris said. His jaw flexed, old soldier anger pressing against calm. "They're painting us as the threat." That night, as they huddled again in the apartment, the TV flickered with Vale's face. He sat across from a news anchor, all charm and polish. "Of course we care deeply about the less fortunate," he said smoothly. "But these disruptions, well, some individuals resist change no matter how much it benefits the majority. We mustn't let a few voices derail progress for the city." He smiled, perfect and practiced. Lena wanted to throw something. "He's calling us a few voices like we don't matter." Gabe tightened his grip on her shoulder. "Which means he's afraid." But it didn't feel like fear when the next day brought more blue tape notices across their block. Or when a patrol car idled outside the church, officers lounging against it like cats claiming territory. Or when Leon returned from the shelter to say quietly, "They wouldn't let me in tonight," said the list was full. But it wasn't. The pack was under siege. That evening, as rain slicked the streets again, A stranger appeared at Gabe's door. A woman in a leather satchel, her hair pinned messily, eyes sharp. She introduced herself only as Marisol. "I work in housing advocacy," she said, lowering her voice. "You've drawn attention. Vale wants you silenced." "Which means you have leverage." Nobody spoke. "They didn't trust gifts, not from strangers. You have a choice," she went on. "Fight inside the system, lawsuits, petitions, endless. Forms, or fight outside it. Media, marches, civil disobedience. Neither's easy. But you don't have much time before the inspectors return with something heavier than paper." She slid a card across the table. No logo, just a number. "Call when you decide, and be ready for what it costs." Then she was gone, swallowed by the wet night. Lena stared at the card long after. Her chest felt heavy, but her hands curled into fists. "This is bigger than us now," she whispered. "No," Harris said quietly. "It's exactly us. That's why it matters." And for the first time, they all knew the fight ahead would not just test the city. It would test them. The week crawled like a wounded animal. Notices bloomed on doors like mold. Patrol cars lingered longer. At the laundromat, Inez found the machines temporarily out of order, though she'd watched men in suits pull the plugs. Harris returned from the VA with another form stapled to his old form, like paper chains meant to bind him in place. Leon's name vanished from the soup kitchen list. They told him politely that he must have missed the cutoff. The city wasn't just squeezing them, it was starving them by inches. By Friday, the church sanctuary was packed. Father Miguel's voice trembled over the microphone. "We are under review for safety code violations. They say too many bodies in one room creates a fire hazard. I say too many empty stomachs in one city is the real hazard." Applause burst, rough and desperate. Then the doors swung wide. Vale entered, flanked by 2 aides and a small escort of uniformed officers. He didn't hurry. He let the silence stretch until the clapping faltered. He stood where the light from the stained glass spilled scarlet across his shoes, and he smiled, that precise, polished smile. "I want to thank you," he began, voice soft enough that the microphone barely caught it, "for your passion. Passion is the lifeblood of a city. But passion without order is chaos, and I'm afraid chaos has taken hold here." The words slithered into the pews. "You disrupt meetings. You endanger children by turning basements into illegal shelters. You resist the very safety measures designed to protect you. I know you think you're fighting injustice, but what you're really doing is threatening progress for everyone else." Lena stood before she knew she would. Her voice cracked the stillness. "Progress doesn't mean pushing people out." Heads turned. Vale's gaze slid to her, calm as glass. "And what do you know of progress, young lady? You think shouting in a church makes you right?" The officer shifted, hands brushing belts. Harris gripped his cane and hauled himself up, pain sharpening his voice. "She knows more than you ever will about belonging. She knows a door is supposed to open when you have a key, and she knows a counterfeit when she sees one." A murmur swept the crowd, half shock, half fire. Vale's jaw flickered, but his smile held. He gestured subtly, and the officers moved forward. One reached toward Harris. Rex lunged not to bite, but to plant himself squarely between the veteran and the uniforms. His growl filled the sanctuary like thunder under stone. Malik cried out, clutching Rex's ruff, "Don't touch him! Don't! You dare!" The room erupted. Some shouted at the officers, others pulled out phones, cameras flashing. Inez lifted her folder of envelopes high. "These are the lives you're crushing," she shouted, shaking the stack until papers fluttered like torn wings. Vale's voice rose above the noise, clipped and cold. "Order must be restored. Remove them." It was a command, not a request. And suddenly, it was choice. The officers stepped closer. Harris leaned heavy on his cane, ready but shaking. Inez's knees buckled, but she stood in front of Malik anyway. Leon rose, hands trembling, as if daring them to see him. Gabe closed his cello case with a click. That sounded final, like armor locking shut. Lena's heart pounded. She knew she could step back, stay safe, let them drag the others out. No one would blame her. But she also knew the silence that would follow would be worse than any punishment. So she stepped forward, chin lifted, and spoke the only words that mattered. "You'll have to take me first." The sanctuary exploded in shouts, chants, cameras, the sound of a city waking up. The officers froze, caught in the floodlight of too many witnesses. Vale's smile cracked at last, the mask slipping to reveal something sharp and mean beneath. In that instant, the fight was no longer about notices or tickets or codes. It was about the raw choice between safety and justice, silence and defiance. They had chosen. The sanctuary trembled with noise chants rising, phones aloft, the heat of bodies pressed shoulder to shoulder. For a moment, it was impossible to tell if the floor itself might crack beneath the weight of so many hearts beating at once. Vale stood stiff, mask peeled back, his smile gone. He gestured again to the officers, but they hesitated. Too many lenses were pointed their way, too many witnesses hungry for truth. To act now would make them villains in 100 headlines by morning. "Stand down," one officer muttered to another. His hand left his belt. The growl of Rex faded, though his body stayed taut as a drawn bow. Father Miguel stepped forward, voice steady, though his hands shook. "This is a house of God," he said. "No one leaves here in chains tonight." Applause thundered. The officers backed toward the door, their retreat a surrender disguised as protocol. Vale followed last, jaw tight, his eyes like razors as they cut across Lena, Harris, Inez, Leon, Gabe, a promise of retribution without words. Then the heavy doors slammed, leaving only the echo of boots on stone. Silence lingered. Not the silence of fear, but the silence of triumph, of disbelief that resistance had actually held. Malik's small voice broke it. "We won?" "No," Harris said softly, easing onto a pew. "We fought. Winning comes later." But the city had heard. By dawn, the video spread Lena standing tall, Rex braced against the uniforms, envelopes fluttering like white flags that refused to surrender. Headlines changed tone. Community defies eviction push. Veteran, child musician, stand up to developer. The city's counterfeit or its heart. Vale released another statement, this one tight and furious beneath its polish. "We remain committed to safe, lawful progress. But disruptive elements cannot dictate policy." Yet the words rang hollow now. Too many had seen the other side. In the days that followed, donations poured into Father Miguel's church. Lawyers volunteered. Journalists camped on the block. And for the first time in years, Leon was called not vagrant, but Mr. Mitchell. By strangers who wanted to hear his story. Inez marched at the front of a protest, Malik on her shoulders holding a sign painted in shaky letters. "Air is a right." Harris spoke on camera about letters and lines, his voice rough but steady. Rex sitting proudly at his heel. Gabe played his cello on the church steps, his bow cutting through traffic noise, turning city air into something holy. And Lena found her voice carried further than she had ever imagined, each word a seed dropped into ground she hadn't known was fertile. They didn't win every battle. Notices still came. Patrol cars still lurked. Vale still schemed in polished offices with glass walls. But the city was shifting, if only by inches. More people showed up to meetings. More hands lifted signs. More doors opened. And in a quiet moment, late one evening, the pack gathered again in Gabe's apartment. Blankets spread on the floor, tea steaming in chipped mugs. They sat not as victims but as allies, family forged by choice, not blood. Harris stroked Rex's ears. "Funny," he said. "All my life I thought survival was about fighting alone. Turns out it's about standing close. Leon smiled faintly. Turns out, he echoed. Inez leaned her head against the wall, exhaustion softened by pride. We didn't vanish, she whispered. Lena looked around at them all, the veteran, the janitor and her grandson, the man once invisible, the father with his cello, the dog who refused to give up. No, she said. We didn't, and we never will. Rex thumped his tail, 1, 2, 3 like a drumbeat calling them forward. The city outside still glittered with towers and pulsed with shadows. The fight wasn't over. Maybe it never would be. But a door had opened deep green. Undeniable, and they had stepped through together. And for the first time, the future didn't feel counterfeit. It felt theirs. 2 years later, the block looked different, but not the way Vale's glossy renderings had promised. The laundromat still rattled, its machines loud but alive. The church still opened its doors every night, its basement painted fresh by volunteers, with new detectors humming on the walls. The bodega still rang its little bell for every customer, though now the counter held a tip jar with Rex's photo and the words neighborhood hero. Vale's towers had gone up across town, glassy and aloof, but here the people had dug in their heels. Inspections still came, but this time lawyers came too, and cameras, and neighbors who refused to scatter. A safety net program had been forced through council, clumsy but real, allowing pets in. Shelters, guaranteeing asthma medication for children, offering rent freezes for seniors. Small victories, but they mattered. Harris walked slower now, but straighter, cane tapping in rhythm with Rex's paws. Inez had fewer envelopes in her folder, and more photos of Malik, taller now, his smile steady. Leon wore a clean shirt most days and carried a ring of keys, not many. Just one for a locker at the community kitchen, one for the church basement, one for the borrowed room he called his. Gabe still played, though sometimes his bow trembled. And Lena had become a voice the city recognized. She never stopped reminding them, we are not counterfeit. On warm evenings they gathered on the stoop with neighbors. Children chalked the pavement, drawing stars where cracks once ran. Music drifted from the cello, soft but unshakable, notes weaving into the night like threads that held the city together. They hadn't fixed everything. They hadn't defeated every cruelty. But they had proved one truth: no notice, no polished speech, no gatekeeper could erase them. And the city, for once, had listened.